in the past, and those who have cared to keep up with them know that they now include many pages of comment and correspondence. The final piece of the puzzle finally fell into place in July of 2004 with a series of articles that appeared in the News Tribune in Tacoma, Washington. Reporter Sean Robinson located the so-called Dove of Oneness and revealed that she was a local resident who had evolved her internet business out of an investment scam headed by Clyde Hood, who is now serving a 14-year sentence in federal prison for mail fraud and money laundering. Larry goes on to say, I won't bore you with the whole story here, but I'll be glad to bore you with it on our website. Now, I've called these people out many times. I've got emails from Dove of Oneness responding on behalf of NESARA. But this story doesn't end there. These people are affiliated with the Farm Aid program, Neil Young and Dave Matthews and, John Mellencamp and, anyway, I've written these guys about this and nothing comes back. Why? How are they sold by Dove of Oneness, NESARA? Well, these pages are still up. Larry goes on to tell how she passed away earlier this year. These pages are still up. And because I got the email and wanted to prepare for this program, I looked into this a little bit. And on their pages, I've challenged them to debate their solution against mathematically perfected economy for years, and all they've done is change their solution into as close as they can understand how to copy it, without any documentation of why they've eradicated interest, no explanation of how it's terminal. They're not the original person who realized these things. They've copied this from them to make money, and they're scam artists. Now, they have a page, they refuse to debate me, but they have a page which is the title of which is, How Does NESARA Compare to Other Proposals? They talk about G. Edward Griffin, Austrian economist, friend of Ron Paul. So, this page goes on. It says, G. Edward Griffin, author of The Creature from Jekyll Island. And if I might say, I've said this many times to many people, but this man is an advocate has been an advocate of interest rates, and even higher, elevated interest rates, as is Ron Paul. Now, why would someone who advocates interest complain about the Federal Reserve System and do all this research, investigative research? Well, of course, he didn't, really. The man who really gave us the story about Jekyll Island is one Eustace Mullins, and I'm sorry. Griffin has just likewise tried to capitalize on Mullins' work. But they go on, they say, G. Edward Griffin, author, second-hand author, of The Creature from Jekyll Island, has publicly stated opposition to NESARA. Yet, as you will discover, many of the proposals made by Griffin in his book are remarkably similar to elements of the NESARA proposal. Well, it's funny. NESARA follows it, and maybe Griffin is following it now. That would be odd. What follows is a comparison of two proposals. And I'm reading this because I know some people from Iceland may be listening to the show today. Hopefully the technical difficulties didn't discourage them. But, there's a reason that I'm going here about these supposedly two proposals. They're purposely not mentioning mathematically perfected economy because they cannot compete with it. And because it's a far more exhaustive explanation of cause and means, which proves against their amateurish web presence that they're not the original author, so they cannot afford to be compared to my work. They go on. Griffin's reform proposal is provided in bold font with a comparison to Nisara immediately following. Now, some of this isn't worth reading all of it, but I'm going to go through 10 points here. Number one, they repeal the legal tender laws. All right. So both plans repeal legal tender laws. In addition to replacing Federal Reserve notes with U.S. Treasury credit notes, note that this is not to make them the notes of the people, and the reason they don't understand that that's what really solves this issue is because they haven't unraveled the nature of currency, that we are truly the issues of our promissory obligations, as I've explained thoroughly for weeks now and 40 years before. Nisara also restores gold and silver coin to circulation. Oh, yeah, right. How? People will be free to use any of the three currencies. Oh, sure, like the three different sets of principles are interchangeable without consequence. In private exchanges, buyers and sellers are free to contract in the medium of exchange they wish to use, including currencies other than the new Treasury credit notes, gold or silver coin. With respect to government exchanges, one of the three currencies must be used, but no government can refuse payment in any of the established currencies. Well, like, for what reason? You know, and of course, there's no explanation for this. I'm going to move on to the second point here because these people aren't worth wasting a lot of time on. They say, 2, freeze the present supply of Federal Reserve notes, except for what will be needed in step number 11. We're not even going to get to step number 11 here. Both plans halt the introduction and circulation of interest-bearing Federal Reserve notes. Nisara replaces Federal Reserve notes with debt-free, there we go again, debt-free U.S. Treasury credit notes, as if money can somehow persist in an original commitment of value if no obligation is involved. And of course, an obligation translates to a debt. If you issue a piece of paper for gold, there's a debt to repay the gold for the paper at some time. And as I've explained for weeks now, there is no way to issue money without some kind of obligation. It's the very fact that money represents an obligation which can cement its value in a mathematically perfected economy and in a mathematically perfected economy only. What's more, the ability to take on debt is what allows us to finance all of our further production. You see, so it's not a disadvantage to have debt. It's difficult to understand that for some people because of all this bogus talk about debt-free money, which comes from my parable of perfect economy, in which I explain is not the way that you can do these things. And when I challenge people about that, they say, well, but there is a way to take this money out of circulation. It's called taxation. Well, then you agree that there's a commitment to pay it out of circulation, which is the debt that it needs to be issued with, because then and then alone does it represent what you're saying it represents. You'd say it represents nothing unless you associate it with a commitment to redeem it in that thing. So, anyway, for some reason, they're freezing the present supply of Federal Reserve notes. Now, they're not telling you why. Then they just say, and they're not telling why, and they're not telling what the extent of this is, and there's no math here. They say the portion of the national debt held and owned by the Federal Reserve System is paid in full with credit notes, and the Fed system is effectively abolished. Okay? So it's paid with other notes. you know, this is just preposterous imitation. And, you know, they can't even rationalize how and why to do these things without too closely copying me for their own comfort, you see. So, 3, they define the real dollar in terms of precious metal content. Why would you have another act to do that when the Constitution already does this? This is what's wrong with the Constitution. And I've explained this many, many times over. If you define the dollar in terms of a precious metal monetary standard, then you can't increase the circulation above the volume of the standard. So you can't sustain industry which requires a circulation above that. Three. Okay, that was 3. They define the real dollar in terms of precious metal contact. Both plans restore ties between circulating currencies in the physical world. What does that mean? Nassar retains the original statutory definition of a dollar, okay? That is 371.25 grains of silver. There's also a gold equivalent. Well, you know, no gold bug in the world is going to go for that, because that's going to drop the price of gold and silver through the floor. And, you know, but the question is still, why? You know, and I'm, you know, not advocating what, you know, the further rationalizations and prejudices of the usual gold bug, but, you know, for crying out loud, you can't just do that. I mean, you're imposing a value that's going to drop it way back to some time where, you know, they didn't even have a monetary system, so they attempted to fix the dollar to in its value to so many units of a precious metal, when the fact that that dollar competed for more or less industry plus the precious metal vacillated the value of the dollar constantly. It's a principle that can't even serve its objects. 4. Establish gold as an auxiliary monetary reserve. Oh, God. Both plans restore gold. You know, this is boring. 5. Restore free coinage at the U.S. Mint. Both plans restore free coinage. Nassar not only restores free coinage of gold and silver. This is just dove of oneness baloney. 6. Pay off the. I'm going to get to a 10th point here, which I think was the one that had something important about it. Okay, pay off the national debt with Federal Reserve notes. Both plans eliminate the debt. I think they already said this. And I'm going to jump to 9 now. Determine the number of all the Federal Reserve notes in circulation. Then calculate the real dollar value of each one by dividing the value of the precious metals by the number of notes, which is completely ignorant of the fact that that's not what they're competing with. They're competing with not only the volume of precious metals, but all property that needs to be represented by the circulation, you know. And so, 10, they say retire all Federal Reserve notes from circulation by offering to exchange them for dollars at the calculated ratio, which was wrong. You know, basic elementary math, you know, you couldn't make a greater neophyte error. Nassar requires that all Federal Reserve notes be retired, but compels no affirmative schedule or deadline. Well, why do it? You know, Federal Reserve notes are merely replaced and removed from circulation as the new credit notes are introduced into circulation. Oh, and what's the exchange process? You know, this is just utterly stupid people, you know, publishing a bunch of utterly stupid gibberish, you know, copying, you know, someone in certain respects and other people in certain respects in ways that conflict with each other even. But here's an interesting thing that I discovered in reading this, is that Griffin, of all people, Griffin is, you know, if you don't know who Griffin is, he's an Austrian economist, an advocate of interest. He appears in Bill Still's purported Money Masters video, along with many other advocates of interest, which of course should lead us to question the authenticity of the ostensible cry of injustice when the piece is produced by advocates of the injustice. Just as hypocritically, Griffin, is a friend of Ron Paul. They've been advocating higher rates of